Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. So thank you for coming. I hope you got a good reading week. So this week, as usual, we're going to run the session to help you with the materials. I have some agenda over here. Very quickly, I also sent an announcement yesterday, just briefly, about what we're going to talk about today. We got a very good collection of a question on the Google Doc about your lectures, and also I also got some very good questions about the weekly Java tutorial, week number 6, which is very impressive. You guys already make some progress. I'm also going to talk about it as we move our way through. And then I will spend some time very briefly just to give you some conceptual guidance on how you should really approach lab number 5. So you should really think about lab number 5 and 6 will be the to really help you build the foundation for object-oriented programming. Given that you have already reviewed the procedural basics in Java in the past 5 weeks, so now you got very solid foundation to really program individual methods. But how do you put the methods together by having method calls? So that's really something we have to learn in the coming 2 weeks. Okay, I will give you some guidance about lab number 5, and your programming test number 2 will be next Wednesday and Thursday, according to your calendar, right? Remember, we're still running through the semester calendar quite faithfully. And then I will try to maybe do some problems together with you, and then maybe try to give you some some review of the basics. We can still continue with this exercise maybe next Monday and Tuesday as well. But for today, I would say once we get to this point over here, I can let you guys choose which category of problems do you want me to go over with you, right? We can. I do have some choices for you. We can see. All right. And then for those of you who might be on a different time zone, if you are making to this session here, I already announced yesterday. So for Tuesday, the Q&A session, so I already rescheduled the Tuesday afternoon session into 9:30 a.m. So that'll be the Toronto time. Okay, so for those of you who might be in Asia, for example, in that case, you will be able to join, before the late evening. So just for your advantage, right? But if you already got all your questions answered on Monday, you don't need to worry. So that will be taken care of already. All right, so let me start with the first question here. And then as usual, whenever I explain anything, please just interrupt if you want to ask any follow-up questions. I think that would be very effective for everybody, all right? The first question here, I believe that's really about the week number 5 tutorials. Okay, let me read through the questions together with you, and then I'll do some programming on Eclipse to clarify. So can you please give a brief explanation as to why we have to consume the new line character after getting an integer input? So basically, when you try to build the console application, remember you can actually write, for example, nextInt for reading an integer from the keyboard, and also you can say nextLine to read a string value from the keyboard. However, it's kind of peculiar. Whenever you do nextInt, I said on week number 5 tutorial that you should really follow that by another nextLine to really consume the extra character, the new line character. I try to not really go into much detail in the tutorial just to avoid confusion. But since you guys asked me, so I will try to clarify a bit, okay? But just to bring everybody to the same page, I would suggest I do a little bit of programming over here on Eclipse, and then I can explain quickly about why you will need that, right? So this may not be just useful for 1022, but later on, if you want to develop your console application beyond this course, you can also just take notes of that. It's a very important technical subtlety you have to be aware of for using scanner class. All right, so I already created one project for week number 5, right? I'll make the source code available to you today after the session. I already created one class. It's simply called reading integer and string. So that's something, well, hopefully that's informative enough to tell you what we are trying to deal with. And I already declared the scanner objects over here. Let's now try to see how can problem actually occur. Okay, first of all, let me say I want to prompt the user for an integer. Okay, so let's say I want to say enter an integer. Okay, and then how do we read the integer? We can say nextInt. So let's say integer I is assigned to input dot nextInt. right? So that's how we read the integer. No problem until now, no problem so far, all right? However, whenever you're trying to read a new line, whenever you're trying to read some string from the user after reading an integer, there is some subtlety you have to pay attention to. Let me show you the wrong version, okay? Let's say after this, after the user has entered the integer, you can ask prompt for their name. For example, enter your name. And then let's say string name over here, input next line, right? Pretty kind of expected, right? Nothing new. And then let's say eventually the console application is going to do the following. It's going to say whatever name it is. Let's say, for example, I'll show it to you. I'll just give you one example. For example, name could be Jackie. So Jackie, you entered, and also here the I value over here. All right, so very simple console application to really illustrate what the problem is. So now let's see this. So what do we expect to see from the console application? After entering the integer for the user, they should be given another chance to enter just another string value for their name. That's what we expect to see from the user, right? Let's try. And I'll simply run this as console application, okay? I'm going to enter some integer here, let's say 23. And as soon as I hit enter, right, I do expect to see I should be given another chance to enter some name. However, when I say enter, the console application did not give me a chance. They simply say the name seems to be simply just an empty character or like an empty line or like an empty space. Whatever name it is, even though I didn't get a chance to really enter the name over here, they simply say you enter 23. So that's definitely there's definitely some logical error over here for the program. Everything compiles, but it does not really behave according to how we expect. All right. So that's also briefly illustrated in your week number 5 Java tutorial videos, I believe in the very beginning part when I spoke about how you can build application using the loop. But now I try to simplify the problem a bit so you can see directly what the problem is. All right, before I give you the solution, let's now try to understand. So this is the brief explanation part your fellow student was demanding. So why is this happening over here? Okay, let's consider this execution flow over here. So let's say after the console application prompt the user to say enter an integer, right? They'll simply say enter an integer over here, right? And then the user try to enter some integer. Let me use a different color over here to show to you. And then the user is going to say 23, and then we say enter. All right. You can think about enter internally to the program is simply like a new line character. So you can think about after we have hit enter over here, what we are passing to the nextInt method over here. You can think about after we actually have done 23 plus enter, there will be some string internally to be passed around in the program. So in this case, it would be 23 and then new line character. So you can think about the new line character is really the enter sign, the enter key that we just typed. All right. However, when we actually pass the nextInt into the I over here, I is only expecting some integer value. So what that would do is, okay, so what will be stored in the I variable over here, I? What's going to happen is the nextInt method over here is going to try to process this input over here. So what that will do is it's going to go over the character over here until it hits the new line. And then it's going to consume 23 only. So the new line character over here is still there. All right, just remember it's still there. So that means 23 will be assigned to I. So far, so good. However, here's a problem. Okay, so now if you try to go to the next line for execution, you're going to say, so now enter your name. All right, so let's say enter your name over here. But now, before the user even get a chance to really say next line, what's going to happen is the new line character over here that was unconsumed. You can think about it as unconsumed. It was not consumed by the previous nextInt. So what's going to happen is the new line character will be treated as the input to this particular new line method. So what's going to happen is the name over here is going to store the new line. And then, so that means we didn't even get a chance to really enter, for example, Jackie or Peter or whatever, right? The name. And then after this, what's going to happen is name will simply just be a new line character. So this is why on the Eclipse, you can see enter your name and then new line and then followed by comma. So you can think about this part here is simply new line character. Guys, any question about this? It's a very brief explanation. I didn't want to go into too much detail about how exactly the input buffer might be stored, but I think that might be the most intuitive explanation for you. So any follow-up question to this before I tell you what the fix should be? Any questions? All right. Okay, so you can still ask me. So let me explain the last part for this problem over here. So what should we do? So now the subtlety you have to remember, well, that's kind of the legacy, I encountered this problem over here when I programmed in this library in 2015. And then the library has been behaving like this, so they never fix it. So maybe that's what they intended to work. So I think if you want to use the scanner class and nextInt and nextLine in this kind of sequence over here, you have to live with it. You have to know what would be the workaround to write. So the workaround would be, so let me just write out some comments over here. Any integer followed by enter key will only consume the integer part, meaning that the new line character will actually be will still be there. It will be used as the input. Okay, and then I will say over here, if the enter key, in which in this case the new line character is unconsumed by nextInt, then that new line character will be treated as the input to the next line over here, right? So now how can we fix it? Then we will just have to consume it, right? How can we consume it? Well, the way to do it will be input.nextLine. So what this will do is, when calling this method here, we simply say, let's now call input.nextLine to really consume this particular new line character over here so that you wouldn't hang around. And then after that, we don't really store this particular new line character that we just consume to any variable, just leave the way it is. And then when we actually try to prompt the user for another string, it will be okay. All right, let's give a try. If I launch the same console application, let's say 23 over here, and then you can see this time I'm indeed given a chance to really enter a name over here. And then I can say, for example, Jackie over here, and then they'll say, Jackie, you enter 23. All right. Very quick recap about this problem over here. Whenever you're using nextInt before nextLine, it's in this particular order. If you try to use nextLine followed by nextInt, the reverse order, you wouldn't really run into this problem over here. So whenever you try to do the nextInt, I would say it's always safe to really consume the unconsumed character, the new line character, because always after the integer we say enter as the user. So that will generate some new line character. You want to always consume it. So otherwise, any later next line can really suffer, without even being given a chance to really enter the string. All right, guys, that's the first question over here. Is there any follow-up question you would like to ask me about this? Anyone?
Professor?
Yes, go ahead.
I'm just wondering, why don't we run into this issue if you are asked to input just numbers like integer or double?
Yeah, you know what? I think somehow, well, again, I think it has to do with the internal workings for the Java library. I didn't really program the scanner library myself, but it's only to do with the numbers, really, because you can think about when I enter 23 followed by the enter sign. So the enter sign will be treated as a new line character. So that's why the new line character is over here. However, somehow their implementation for nextInt would not actually consume this particular new line character. So you still stay somehow in the input buffer that's actually shared by all the methods for the scanner. So when this method only consumed 23 over here, we still got this new line character here. And then when the next line method is now expecting, it will simply look at the input buffer to see, oh, that was not empty. So that means you got some input for me already. So I'll just take it without actually giving the user a chance to really enter another input string. So that's just the way it is. Okay. To me, it's more like a design decision, maybe by the scanner developer. Maybe we can simply perceive that as a design error, but it's just the way it is.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, good. Guys, any other questions about this? So the bottom line, since for this course, we only gave you console application classes in the beginning labs so that you can kind of visualize the effects of your programs on the console. However, now, starting from week number 3 and 4, I mean your lab number 3 and 4, we already started to focus more on the JUnit tests. So I would say even this one here, I can easily forget about the trick myself. So I always have to refer to the workaround solution myself. So I would say if this is only for your knowledge, you wouldn't have to worry about this detail for any of the programming test, written test, or exam. You don't have to. But it's something you have to know if you want to develop Java console application. All right, any more questions? All right, good. All right, so that's about console application. That's the first question. Let me go to the second one. All right. It's a good question here, this one here. Actually, not yet. Okay, so this is something about array. Is there a reason as to why we have to redeclare the type when we do discrete assignments for arrays? Okay, let me, there might be some misunderstanding over there, but let me just explain very quickly. So one thing you should really realize is for a strongly typed programming language like a Java or C# or many other languages, redeclaring the type is never possible, despite any types you're talking about. So basically, once you declare the type for a variable being, for example, be that maybe an integer, string, Boolean, array, or some class type, once you declare that, you can never change it. Okay, that's an important principle over here. It's never possible. So let me try to maybe write a very simple code, and then if you were the person asking the question, you can maybe help me out to tell me which part you're confused. Okay, very quickly. Since you talk about the discrete assignment, so I would know which part you're talking about. Let's say this. If I declare integer array, let's say, and let's say A over here. And let's say we simply say new integer array, let's say 3, just make it simple. Okay, so what this will do is it's going to let A pointing to the starting address of the array A, and then since it's of size 3, so indices will be 0, 1, and 2. You know that very well already, right? Since we got many exercises already. Initially, all the values will just be 0, 0, 0, just the default values. Okay, let me try one thing here. So when you say redeclare the type, it's never possible. So you can try this on Eclipse. If you say, now, I don't want A to be simply an integer array. I want it to be a Boolean array, let's say. If I simply say Boolean array, and then I would say A is simply assigned to new, let's say Boolean, maybe of size 4. Okay, let's say you try to put these two lines in the same context, right? It was there will simply be compilation error. You can give it a try. It's very easy to experiment. There was simply compilation error. So that's simply because A has been declared already. You just cannot do it. All right. So having this in mind, let me just go a little bit further over here. Okay, let's say after this line. Okay. And then when we talk about discrete assignments, you don't need to redeclare anything. You will simply refer to A, which we already declared. You will say A at position 0, index 0 at index 1, and also A at index 2. And they will simply be assigned to some value that will be compatible with its type. You can see this type over here tells you every member should be integer, right? You can say 23. Let me use a different color here. You can say 23. 46, and then 10. Right, so that will simply do that. Right, very simple. All right. Any follow-up question to this? I think the main lesson for this question here will be you just cannot redeclare the type for any variable. Once you declare the type for a variable, you have to commit to it throughout the lifetime of your program. You just cannot redeclare. All right. Another thing I can think of, which might be what you're confused about, you can reassign the array into another object. Maybe that's what you're confused about. Okay, let's say this. Let me just continue with the program to here. Okay. Let's say after this, we'll simply declare another integer array. Let's say b. Okay. And then that one there, I'll simply use the initializer expression. Let's say maybe 1, 2, and 3. So what this will do is we got another array over here, b, that simply point to another array over here. So 0, 1, 2. And then we got 1, 2, and 3. So now we got 2 array objects, right? Array 1 and array 2. Okay, so now we got 2 separate arrays. And what you may want to do is you can say A is assigned to B. So this is about reassignments. It's not about redecoration. Okay, it's about reassignments. And it will be very important for you to know what the pink line over here is going to do, because it will create something called aliasing, which I just finished recording part of your weekly tutorial for this week, for week number 7. You will have to understand something called aliasing. It's a very important phenomenon to be aware of if you do OOP. All right, so here what you're doing is you're basically copying the address, the starting address of the array that is stored in B, copy that over into A. And what will be the consequence? The consequence will be A will simply just point to wherever B is pointing to. So that will be the consequence, right? That's also something we spoke about in the tutorial video. So what this will do is A, rather than pointing to this array over here, is now pointing to this particular array. It's called reassignments, which is completely different from redecoration. So my guess would be maybe you were just confused about redecoration versus reassignments. Redecoration is always forbidden. But for redecoration, as long as you're assigning to value of the right type, then you're okay. Oh, I see. So it's from Fiorilla. Okay, Fiorilla. You asked the question here. Oh, what you're wondering about is this, right? Is that what you're wondering about over here? So even though you actually already put integer over here, but you still have to mention this. I think that's kind of be the reason is you can think about this part here is not really about decoration. Okay. This part here is not really about, it's not really not decoration. Okay, first of all, it's not decoration. And point number 2, what this does is telling the Java runtime to which compiler, they should really at the runtime, what they should do is they should really first of all create, since we got a new keyword here, so they would know they should really allocate some part of the memory to create this array. And what kind of array should you really create? But I guess for the convenience for the compiler, if you mention an integer over here, it simply helps. And you're telling the compiler create an integer array and then with 3 slots over here. So it's just like an informative sign to the compiler. It's not really declaring the array, because if you think about this declaration, it's not really declaring for any variable. The only part about declaring for variable is over here, because this part goes before A. But for this part over here, it does not bind any variable. So does it make sense to you? Okay, Palversia here. So the integer says that the variable is an array and the new allocate space. Yeah, that's correct. That's correct. Let me just rephrase what you're saying here. Whenever you see the new keyword in Java, it tells you that whatever expression that goes after that will be to indicate to the Java compiler that you should really allocate some memory space, either for an object, which we will talk about in this week about the OOP. But in this case, you're just allocating the space for 3 elements in the array of type integer. And this part over here is about decoration. And the decoration simply says whenever you refer to A, the variable over here, you're really talking about some address to the beginning of some array. Okay, so decoration versus allocation. All right. All right, is everybody okay for this? All right, you're welcome. Any other questions here? It's actually a good question, actually. And guys, let me just say, make a little bit connection to your week number 6 tutorial video, just quickly, okay? So we learned about how you can create a class, for example, member, right? That's basically what you're doing for the tutorial. If you haven't got to that part, that's okay. So if I created one class called member, for example, and I say member M1 is assigned to new over here member. And then you might put some, let me just say default constructor over here. Similar principle. Since we got a new keyword over here, so the member over here tells me I should really allocate some space for member objects. And this part over here is about declaration, saying that the variable M1 can store the address of a member objects only. So again, declaration versus allocation over here. And just for your information, when you get to 2030, either in the summer or the fall, okay, this type over here does not necessarily have to match this type over here. For example, I just for your information, it's possible that rather than member over here, I can say, for example, let's say golden member. Because in a club, there might be some hierarchy about what kind of membership you want to pay for. It can be silver, it can be bronze, it can be golden. So here, golden member is completely different type from the member. However, this may be valid because there's another advanced concept which we have to talk about in 2030. It's called inheritance, and more precisely polymorphic assignments. But you don't need to worry. I just want to let you know. Okay. So this part over here is really about allocating some space as long as you got a new keyword. Okay. All right, any more question about the syntax for the new keyword? And also any confusion still about this part here versus this part here, please. All right, seems like everybody is okay. Let me move on to the next one. All right. So this one here, I don't think your fellow student really meant for me to really go over the entire example over here. Let me take a guess. Michael, was it you who actually asked the question, or maybe somebody else?
Oh, yes,
I guess it's not you,
this
right?
is my question. This is my question.
Oh, okay. I'm just taking a guess. Okay, so Michael, so
Yeah.
if this was your question here, okay, let me set the context for everybody so I can have some interaction with you. So guys, I think remember for your week number 5 lecture that was a release before the reading week. And then we spoke about 4 different versions for checking the universal versus existential properties, right? That's the context. And then Michael's question was specifically about how to interpret this table over here. So maybe that's something we can clarify. Specifically, here, he was just saying that the so far only positive numbers, you can see this is the Boolean variable that we declare in the example code, right? You can see we're using that over here, and we should really update it by accumulating it using conjunction, since now we talk about universal property. And then Michael was wondering about what these values, what's really the timing for these values over here. So Michael, I think what you put over here is actually right. So you can think about the timing it really is in the very beginning of every iteration. Okay, so that is why you can see for this particular input array, this will be the witness of violation, right? So that's the witness of violation. So we talk about this word in the lecture. So I'm not going to repeat unless you have a question. So this -1 is going to make this particular value actually false, right? It's going to make it false, meaning that after this particular iteration, so in the iteration where, okay, let's say this, in the iteration where the loop counter is equal to 2, right? So that means over here, when we first started the iteration, the so far only positive number will still be true to begin with, because when I is equal to 2, so that means we have only finished this part of the array, and so far we haven't found any non-positive number. So that's why this remains to be true until now. And then for that particular iteration, since we are checking to see ns, so this will be ns2. So ns2 is actually referring to -1. So that's why -1 is going to cause and is 2 larger than 0 should be false. So after this, we're going to accumulate the false into so far only positive numbers. So that will make so far positive number actually false. But this only occurred at the end of the iteration when I is equal to 2. And also we update the counter, the loop counter value to be 3. So that's why when we actually go to the next iteration over here, in the beginning, we know that this has already become false. That's why it doesn't matter how many more iterations you might go, this will just be false anyway. So Michael, does that clarify your question maybe here?
Yes, it does. Yes.
Okay, very good. Yeah, I think what you put over there, actually that's correct. So your guess was right. Yes. So this column here only talk about the value for the Boolean variable in the beginning of the iteration for sure. All right. Okay. One question here from Miracle. When it comes to not using array list in our code, yes, you're not allowed to use, to be more precise, you're not allowed to use any library class in your Java code. We're allowed to call the array class still, right? So when you say array class, let's be precise over here. You know, there is one Java class called arrays. And in order to use it, you will have to say import. You know, I forgot which package it is from. Maybe it's from utility. Okay, I just write it down. It may be just Java the util dot arrays. And one possible method you might use is actually arrays dot sort. I'm not too sure, Miracle, if this is the arrays class you're talking about. If that's what you're talking about, then no, you cannot use it because that one will involve having this import statement in the beginning of your code. So you're not allowed to use it. However, if you're only talking about simply use primitive array over here, and you can write a loop, you can write initializer, you can write the discrete assignments on manipulating this array, that'll be fine. Okay, if that's what you're asking. Does that answer your question, Miracle? Okay, I presume I did. All right. Let me now move on to the next question. All right. Can I repeat it once more? Sure. Basically, I'm not too sure what you meant over there about array class. Okay, there is no array class in Java, I believe, but there's one class called arrays with S. It's plural. All right. So this arrays class will require you to actually say import Java that you tell the arrays, I believe, and then so this will make it invalid to use. Will make it forbidden to use because any class that belongs to the Java library, you're not allowed to use it in your lab and also in the in your programming test. So the rationale is we want you to focus on the primitive array like this and simply use the control structure like a loops, if statement, and also array indexing, and also the initializer discrete assignment to really program your solution. Okay. Yeah, so good. So if you meant arrays, don't, no, the answer is no, you cannot use it. Because in order to use the arrays class, you must import it into your code. So you just cannot use it, right? Remember in the lab and also in the test preparation guide, we said you're simply not allowed to use any library class. Okay, good. Very good. Okay, let's now go on to the next question here. I think this one is really great question here, although it will be covered, I believe, in this week's lecture. Okay, but it wouldn't hurt to mention that quickly. Okay, let me point out to you. I'm gonna write something on the iPad, but before I do that, I can tell you where you can find it. Okay, if you go to the lecture materials for week number 6, which I just released yesterday, right? If you simply go there, and then you will see for lecture number 4, I said this part over here is only for self-study for this week. So for this week, your focus should be to finish off lecture number 3 about loops and arrays, and also to finish the tutorial videos. But if you really got some extra work you wish to complete, you can definitely go over the slides. I will try to go over them as well in the coming week's lecture, but in a slightly faster fashion, because that one, they overlap pretty much with your Java tutorial. So I don't want to repeat too much, just to save your time. However, if you go to that slide over there, if you click on that, okay, I'll show you which page you should go to. If you click on that, go to slide 51, okay, if you go to 51, that one basically talks about Java data types. You can remember that's the definition we spoke about for Java data types, right? In the elementary programming lecture in week number 1. Data type is simply talking about the possible values you can store in a variable declared to be of that particular type, all the possible runtime values. In week number 1, we basically spoke about all the primitive types, like an integer, floating point number, character, and also Boolean. One thing to note, you can see that the spelling of the types in Java over here for these types, they're simply all lower cases. Just there's no capital letter, all right? However, another type that we use quite often already, starting from week number 1, is the string class. Somehow the spelling of that is a little bit peculiar compared with others in the primitive type category. You can see that one there is capitalized. So capitalized in the convention is in Java, whenever you put any type. Okay, so now you can refer to this slide here. Let me just go a little bit deeper on the iPad. Okay. What we want to speak about really is about declaration for variable. So when we talk about declaration of variable, variable. Okay, the syntax would simply be, you simply put some type over here. So this will be some type. And then some variable name, for example, x. So this will be the name of the variable. And after declaration, you got two choices. Let me mention quickly. Either you can simply put a semicolon over here, meaning that x will just be initialized by the default value. For example, integer will just be initialized to be 0. And for double, it will be 0.0. That's one option here. Or you can say, once you declare the variable, you can say it's initialized to be some concrete value or some value expression over here, right? So that's something you already know. Right, let me focus on this particular type over here. So there are, broadly speaking, two categories of types in Java. Okay, for the type over here, we can say category number 1, primitive. And number 2, reference. And the easiest way to think to really tell, okay, is primitive is really bounded. There's only a bounded number of primitive types. Integer, for example, integer, Boolean, character, double, and etc. You can look at the list over here. If you go back to the slide, you can see these are all the primitive types. Okay, and you can think about anything that is not primitive type should be a reference type. Okay, non-primitive. And that means there is a corresponding class. For this particular type. So for example, for the string type, if you simply put string over here, so string is considered as a reference type. So that means there is a string class that's declared in the Java library in this particular case. So you can definitely search Java API and then search for the string class. We wouldn't talk about API until later, so you don't have to worry. But for Java, for string, it's a very special type over here. A common confusion could be, since we use the string class so often, you might think string is simply a primitive type. No, according to the definition, primitive type is simply all these types in lower cases. Okay, and let me say a little bit more. Okay. One thing that's also important to really say, let me just show you two examples. If you got primitive type variable, in that case, I can say, for example, integer I, like that, all right? And then I got another type over here, let's say reference type variable. And that one there, you should really put some existing class that you actually declare. For example, in your week number 6 tutorial video, assuming that the member class has been declared already. So I can say member. I can say M. You can see these two are declarations of variable following the same syntax. However, this is a primitive type, and this is a reference type. So what will be the consequence on I and M? So here, let's talk about the consequence. The consequence will be I over here at the runtime, stores integer value only. For example, the way to visualize that would be, it simply will just be I, and it can be storing maybe simply 23. Whatever integer value it is, you will simply store that value directly into the placeholder for the variable, for the primitive type variable. And the more interesting case would be for the reference type, right? So this is something I already started to introduce to you in your week number 6 Java tutorial since last Friday. Let me recap very quickly. Whenever you declare some reference type, so that means you can think about, there are two ways for you to think about it. All right, let me just do this. Let me just use a new page over here. Let's now talk about specifically about reference type variable. Reference type variable over here. And the example I would like to use is member and n over here. All right. And then at a more hardware level, you can think about n is just like a placeholder over here. And what can I store inside this placeholder? The principle is it's not going to, okay, number one, it does not store an entire objects. Instead, it stores the address of some objects, and notice I'm being very careful about the wording, of type member. Let's say, for example, let's remember our memory diagram in your tutorial video. For example, let's say over here, maybe for this particular region, you got one member object over here. And then let's say here, you got another one over here. Maybe you got another class, for example, it's called person. Okay, so now this part, this region over here is for the member objects. And this part over here is for the person objects over here, right? And then let's say this might contain some address over here, just symbolically. Let me just say address, okay, let me just make it up, okay? Maybe 061101, okay? And then this one here, maybe 061121, for example, right? It's really important to note, in order for you to store some value into the n, right, you have to store some objects of the right type, the address of some object of the right type. For example, this one may be stored into the objects variable over here, but this one here may not be stored. This one, no, because it's of the wrong type. It's simply person, okay? Another thing to note, okay, in Java, you just cannot say something like this. You might be wondering, can I write something like this? Can I say member n is simply assigned to, assuming that this is a valid address, assuming that, okay? Can I simply say 0x1101? So this is simply some member objects address. Okay, can you say that? No. Such direct assignments of an address to some object variable is simply forbidden, okay? Direct assignments of objects address is not allowed. Okay, so the follow-up question would be, what would be allowed? Two things will be allowed, okay? Number one, you can do object creation. Okay, for object creation, you can say, for example, member n will be assigned to, now I'm using a new keyword, right? Whenever we talk about new keyword, and that one I'm gonna call some constructor. And then maybe member over here, for example, Jim. Okay, let's say we got one constructor type that's simply take the name of the member. Okay, this will be okay. So what this will do is it's going to allocate maybe, let's say, for example, in this way, let's say this line over here let me just do this here. Let's say this line over here simply just allocate another memory over here of member type, right? And that one there maybe also got some address over here, but you cannot assign the address directly. But by doing this, you will indirectly store the address of this particular object into M. You will, okay? So for example, this address might be 061231, okay? So what that will do is it's going to store 061231, right? And then the way to visualize it would be, you can simply think about M over here is really pointing to that particular object. M is really pointing to, sorry, it's a little bit messy over here. But I can think about M is really pointing to this particular object. That's how we visualize it, right? That's kind of the later part in the week number 6 tutorial video. Okay, that's approach number 1. You can simply just create a new object using the new keyword over here, and then indirectly, the new object's address will be stored into M. That's number 1. Okay, that's something you learned in this week. Number 2 is the fun part. Okay, number 2. Number 2, let's say this. Number 2 over here. Okay, let's say this. Member M1 is new member. And we also got member M2 is new member. All right, so currently, according to what you will learn this week, M1 and M2, they simply store addresses of 2 distinct objects because they are created using 2 separate new keywords, right? So M1 will be, so the way to visualize this would be, think about M1 over here. So M1 and also M2, right? So M1 would be, basically M1 will be pointing to some member objects over here, okay? So let's not worry about the structure for the object just yet, okay? And then also for M2 is also just pointing to another object over here. Okay, let me ask you guys a little bit, since well, even though I haven't covered that just yet, but you guys can take some guess if you wish. What does it really mean when I say M1 is assigned to M2? So that's my question for you. Anybody want to try?
Professor?
Michael, go ahead, please.
Are you saying that you're then rewriting, or sorry, you're making M1 point to the same address as M2?
Aha, that's good. Michael, that's pretty good. Pretty much there. Yeah. So guys, this is something called aliasing in object-oriented programming. Don't worry, I explained that thoroughly in your coming tutorial video, which will be released on Friday. But let me just mention that very quickly. And don't lose the big picture. The big picture is you cannot store address directly into the object variable or reference variable. You cannot do it. There are only 2 ways you can update the reference variable. Either you simply say the object variable here is simply assign the address of some newly created objects. That's one way, indirectly. Another way is you can simply reassign, somehow, let's say reassign M1 into another object that might be pointing to somewhere. Okay. So now the way to think about this line here would be, think about N2 actually stores some object address. And we're copying over the address that is stored in M2 into M1. And as Michael correctly pointed out, how do you update the diagram? So the question is, should I update to say M1 rather than pointing to over here is pointing to over here, or M2 rather than pointing to here is now going to point to over here? There are 2 possible. Think about it as a multiple choice for your written test, for example, right? Should it be 1 or 2? So Michael, is it 1 or 2?
Oh, sorry, I was making notes on what you said previously. I didn't catch it exactly.
Yeah, no problem. So let me just tell you the answer directly. The answer should be 1. Okay. So what this is doing, let me write it down. Okay, so you don't you won't lose the information. Copy the address stored in N2. Sorry, I'm running out of space. I'll just put it here. Into N1. N1 and M2, they're both storing addresses. So now you can think about M1 is here, N2 is over here. N1 stores maybe triangle, and M1 stores square, and the M2 stores triangle. So what this line will do is copy over this triangle, duplicate it, and overwrite it into M1. So what this will do is, so this will store also triangle. So think about we are not really trying to allocate another object in the memory. That's really important. Let me write down. Okay, no new memory is being allocated. Instead, you're simply just copying the addresses around. Okay, so now by copying M2 into M1, so that means M1 and M2, they should now be pointing to the same objects, which will be, so that means M1 over here, rather than pointing to over here, it's now going to point to wherever M2 is pointing to. So this is something called aliasing. Okay, a little bit look ahead for this week. I'll just mention that, and then we are done for this question. It's something called aliasing. Aliasing simply means for the same objects in the memory, there might be more than one names for that particular objects. You can either try to get access to this object here using the name M1, or you can get access to this object here in the memory, the same objects, using another name called M2. Either one is okay. So that's called aliasing. Right? So that's something you can find complete details later. All right. All right, guys, it's quite a bit of a discussion over here, but let me go back to the very, very beginning for this original question over here, okay? Whenever you're declaring variable over here, just remember this type over here can either be primitive type, in which case you're only storing the value directly, right? However, if that's reference type, meaning that anything other than primitive type, any class that's either in the library or maybe in your project, which you create by yourself. In that case, it will be non-primitive, and then what the variable will store in case there's a reference type, you will store the address of the objects, right? You will store the address of the objects indirectly rather than the entire objects, right? So that's something you want to try to get used to. This will definitely be a useful concept, not just for this course, but later on, once you get to 2030, 2011, you still need this foundational concept for OOP. All right, guys. Any more question about data type? Everybody okay? All right. Okay, let me move further. Okay, so this one here, I think this one's easy to answer. Let me just tell you what the question is. Line number 13 and 14, right? 13 and 14 over here. Basically, your fellow student was wondering about why do we need the parentheses over here? Why do we need it? All right. So let's hypothetically, let's say we didn't have the parentheses over here. Let me simply get rid of this. Okay, I'll get rid of it. And also I will get rid of it. And if you try this, you will see that you will get some compilation error in Eclipse, in the Java compiler. And the reason is, let's see why. You can see this part over here, this is a string. And then we talk about this plus operator in Java is actually overloaded, meaning that it will only be a numerical addition if both operands are actually integers. But now the left operand is already a string. So that means this will only be for concatenation. And then what that will apply to is basically only to the member one. So you can think about the plus actually has higher precedence than the equal. Higher precedence, and we also talked about operator precedence, previously. So this one, higher precedence than the equal. So that means what's going to happen is we're going to take the concatenation of these two first. That one there is going to give us a string, right? First of all, so the pink part expression there is going to be just another string, and then member two over here is of type member. More precisely, member 2 is the address of some member objects. And now we are trying to compare using equal over here. Can we do that? The answer is no. It's simply uncompatible. You cannot compare some object address against some string value. So this is not type correct. So that's why it will be not type correct. And the way to fix it is like a nextLine. We simply put the parentheses to really parentheses over here to force the order of evaluation. So what's going to happen is this part over here, we are comparing apple with apple. So member 1 and member 2, they're simply addresses of some member objects. So now this will be some Boolean type. And then when we say plus over here, so this part over here is going to be string. And string concatenated with Boolean will just give you another string. So that's why you can see the console application works in the tutorial video. All right, so does this make sense for everybody who is still here? Any questions about this? Any questions?
So, Professor?
Yes.
So it doesn't matter if it's concatenation or addition, like as long as like it does have the same precedence regardless, right?
You mean, you know what? I would say I will talk about it maybe separately. So the reason that this will be concatenation is because you can see one operand is already a string. So that's why it's already a string. It will be a string concatenation. It will only be a numerical addition if this part here is also a number. I might see what you mean. Okay, let's say this. According to what Michael is suggesting, what about I say this? System.out.println. Let's say this part over here, rather than simply a string, let's just 23. 23 plus member 1 equals member 2. I can tell you that this one here, even if I put the parentheses over here, you will still have a compilation error. The reason is you can see this part here is integer. And the plus in some way has not been determined yet, whether it should be for string concatenation or it should be for numerical addition, because we don't know yet what this type is. We had to see that. But this part here is going to be Boolean. Is there a plus defined between integer and Boolean? No. So this will not compile. Okay. And then also, if you try to get rid of this part over here, similar argument will be applied, like how I describe this case over here. So Michael, does that answer your question?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Very good. All right. All right, guys. If no more questions, I'll move on to the next one. All right, next one here. I think the next few is really about to clarify some concept about using the keyword this. Okay. Let's say, see over here. Let's see the very first one. It's really about parameter. You can see parameter ID. Okay, let me just remind you very quickly. We got a member class. So these are the attributes. And this is a constructor with the same name as the class, right? And also these are the parameters. And then you can see the parameters ID over here has the same name as the attribute over here. This is actually allowed in Java. However, you have to be very careful when you are trying to define the body of the method over here. Whenever you say ID over here, okay, you can see whenever you say ID, this is really just referring to the ID over here rather than this ID over here. It's not that one, okay? And I'm not sure if that's Michael, but your fellow student did some research, very nice. It's called variable shadowing, okay? I didn't really mention that word in the tutorial video. It's called shadowing. You can think about conceptually, it's like this umbrella over here, right? There's some umbrella over here, and then whenever when you're talking about the ID over here, the umbrella somehow hides the ID that's actually at the top over here, so you don't see that anymore. So the ID over here is really referring to the ID that's in the parameter. Okay, one more thing to say. Having ID as attributes versus ID as a parameter, there is no clash because something called shadowing, right? That's already explained. And so under this particular shadowing, how can I refer to this particular ID? Well, the answer is you have to say this.id. You have to say that. Okay. So now another question would be, when would it be necessary for you to use the this keyword? I would say use the this keyword when the shadowing might be effective. So for example, let me show you one case where you don't really need shadowing. Let me try to define another version for this constructor over here. I can say public and then member. Okay, let me just use one attribute here. Integer. Let me say ID input. Just like that. And then over here, I can say ID is assigned to ID input. So now in this case over here, it will be okay not to use this, because this ID over here, it's not really shadowed by any of the parameter. It's simply they got different name. So that's why when you say ID over here, it's really referring to the ID that's in the attributes. Okay, I would say it's more like a personal preference over here. I would say pros and cons. If you want to go with this particular solution over here without using the this keyword, in that case, you will have to make sure you want to really create, you want to come up with names of the parameters that's different from the attributes. So that's for this solution over here. On the other hand, if you simply don't want to come up with any new names, you simply reuse the name over here, ID, type, and etc. In that case, you can simply use this dot to disambiguate, as I explained in the tutorial videos. However, I can tell you that this is actually more common, because if you can make your program easier, you should really do it without coming up with new names like this. All right. Is this clear to everybody? It's just about, for the constructor, why we need to use this keyword. It is because you want to use this to really overcome the shadowing that we have over here. That's why.
Professor?
Yes.
May I ask, like, I just looked up the definition for shadowing, and I'm just wondering, like, this is also applied like in other like contexts, like if you have like a variable in main method, and in it is a loop, and like for example, in the main method you have variable I, and then in the for loop you have the variable I declared something else. Will that clash, or is that considered shadowing?
Michael, this is a good question here. Why don't we try right away quickly? Let's try. So let me say I create some console application over here. Let me just say shadowing. Okay, let's say this integer I, let's say 23. So this the scope for this variable is going to be for the entire main method for sure. And then if I got for loop over here, let's first of all try. Can I say another like a loop counter simply I? Can I say that? I cannot, because I has been declared already. First of all, you cannot do that. Okay. Let me say J. Let's say J less than 10 and J plus plus. Okay. And then I believe this is what Michael was talking about. Can I say, for example, did I do anything wrong over here? So J here, oh, may not be initialized. I see. Initialized to be 0, let's say. Okay. So so Michael, I think the question, the answer to your question here will be quite straightforward. It will simply not be allowed if you simply got another variable over here, because in order for me to read, I basically, if I want to use I can simply say, for example, system.out.println line. And I can simply say I. So the I over here, if I move my mouse over, it's going to, let me see if that will actually do it. If I move my mouse over here, you can see it's referring to this I over here, right? Just reusing it. But if you want to have each, you just cannot have shadowing in this context, because the only way you can do it is by having, for example, integer I, for example, right? And that one is also going to clash with the I over here. So you just cannot do it.
Can I ask like, why is shadowing allowed for the tutorial video example?
Yeah,
and
so the
not in this
shadowing, yeah,
context.
so sure. So the shadowing basically is talking about when you got input parameters for the method. Okay, so think about the shadowing that we're talking about is really, you can think about there is a potential, I put in quote, clash between method parameters and class level variables. So that's what we're talking about. So you can see here, so this will be the input, you can think about this is the input parameters, was the scope will be the entire method over here. And this is the ID at the class level, and the scope will be the entire thing over here. So it is right, they actually overlap, but for this particular overlap, right, overlap is actually allowed. And the way to fix the, to really disambiguate is by using the this keyword. So Michael, does that answer your question? Yeah, you go ahead.
So it just works in certain cases then, right?
Yes, it definitely works in this particular unique case. So whenever you got a clash between the parameter name, so let me emphasize, it has to be a parameter name, and also the class level variable, like in this case, attributes. In that case, there wouldn't be any compilation error. In that case, you can simply just use it. If you use ID, you're going to have the shadowing, meaning that ID is simply referred to the ID over here, right?
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
I believe shadowing is actually existing for at least all the C family language. For Python, for JavaScript, I'm not too sure. You guys can tell me. But I can tell you that there might be some other languages they wouldn't allow shadowing, meaning that for Java, it's okay. However, in some other language, if you simply got a parameter name that clashes with the larger scope variable, they will give you some compilation error. But in Java, they simply allow. So that's why shadowing actually somehow resolve the conflict implicitly for you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, no problem. Yeah, so Michael, I think the main confusion you might have is why shadowing is actually allowed in this case. I think it's more like a language design choice. Whenever there's a clash between parameter and the attributes, they simply just will actually assume you really meant to say the scope that's closer to the usage. In this case, it will be the parameter scope. But if you really meant to say the larger scope, you got to use the this keyword. It's just a language rule we have to obey. All right. And this one's done. Okay, about the using the this keyword. And this one here, you know what? I think this one here has been answered as well. So Michael, were you the one asking this question here?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right. Do you think that this might be answered already, right? Because this one here, you were just asking about when to use this, right? So let me just maybe add a little bit more to what I just said. Let's say, for example, okay, let me just give you a little bit more explicit information here. Let's talk about this member constructor. Okay, the this keyword over here, okay, this will be necessary because shadowing. Because in this case, you can see the input parameter weights somehow clashes with the attribute weights over here. However, because of shadowing, it will be resolved. If you talk about weights over here, it's going to refer to the weights over here. But if you use this weights, it's going to refer to the attributes. Right? That's one occasion. Let's now talk about, let's say, in the accessor and mutator. Okay. Let's say for let's say talk about mutator. Okay. Let me just use this one here. So that's a method you're familiar with. Let's say get BMI report. Okay. This one over here. Let's say this weights over here and this heights. Okay. So the this over here and the this over here, these two, in this occasion, it will not be necessary. Because no parameters clash with attributes weights and heights. Right, you can see here the input is simply just empty list. On the other hand, hypothetically, all right, let's say this is version number 1. Okay, let me just say version number 2 over here. Okay, you can also try it out. Okay, if I say public and also string, and then I'll define another method here, get BMI report number 2, for example. And then here, I simply just put another parameter over here. Let's say double. Sorry, I'm just running out of space, but you can see the flow here. So double, let's say, simply say weights. Let's say that's the one I want to have. Okay. So the main point here is you can see the weights over here clashes with the weights over here. Right? You can see these are actually different. So now in this case, inside the context for this particular method, if you simply say weights, so that one simply refer to the weights over here because of shadowing. On the other hand, if you actually say this.weights over here, it's going to refer to the attribute weight over here. So Michael, so in response to your question over here, so you can use this keyword in either the constructor, the accessor method, or the mutator method. However, it will not be necessary to use this keyword if you don't have the occurrence of shadowing. That's the principle.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
Okay, very good. It's next question. Very good. All right, let me move on. Okay, and this one here, actually, the question is here, when declaring a variable of the type of certain class, assigning it the address of an object of that class, right? That's exactly what I just talked about, right? So you can think about here, let me just mention some points and then we are done for this one here. You can think about Alan here is going to store any address of type member, okay? So you can think about this part over here is going to assign, this part here is going to assign the address of newly created member objects. Yeah, and let me just mention very quickly, that's something I also spoke about thoroughly. Again, you cannot assign directly address to a reference variable. You can either try to say, I want to assign the address of some newly created objects implicitly to the object variable, one way to go. Another way to go is you simply got M1 and M2, and then simply do variable reassignments. So these two approaches, okay? I think that might also answer the question here. I'll pause a little bit here. Is there anything you guys want me to clarify over here?
Oh yeah, I have a question.
Armin, yes, now this time I can hear you. Good.
So it's not related to this, it's related to lab 6. Can I still ask?
Lab 5 you meant.
So yeah, lab 5. So I can
you know
find the lab
Armin,
5.
Armin, give me one more. Before you move on to lab 5, I will be happy to answer. But I would say, guys, regarding this particular point about assigning addresses implicitly to reference variable, is there any questions? Before I move on to lab number 5. Yes. Somebody?
It's just a question. Like, this is my question, but
Yeah.
like my question was, are you pointing, like, are you assigning it to the starting address of the object, or are you just assigning to any of the addresses in that object?
Yeah, conceptually, I think that'll be the starting address, conceptually.
Okay, starting address. Okay, thank you.
Starting, yeah. However, okay, I think, yeah, starting address you can think about. Yeah, starting one. Pretty much like the case for the array, the starting address, yes. All right, anyone else? Okay, and now I can move on to lab number 5. And Armin, go ahead.
So I can find the lab 5 PDF instruction file and the starter project files, but I can't find the submission. And in the PDF, it says it's due this Friday. So
you mean the submission? Yeah, I'm going to make them visible after the session today. So you will be able to submit.
Okay. So do we get any bonus marks for submitting it early?
Sorry?
Do we get any bonus marks for submitting early?
I'm afraid no.
No.
Yeah. Are you done already?
No.
Okay. You know, I think yeah, if you can get it done earlier, I would say good for you. So in that case, you can use some spare time to maybe you know, do some other stuff, or maybe just to do the example again. I'm afraid no bonus mark. Yeah. All right. So now let me speak. I got two more things in my agenda, but now we are basically about 350. I still got quite a good number of you over here. Okay. Let me just try to do as much as I can. Okay. I want to speak about lab number 5 very quickly, but of course, you also got to do your parts to follow through the tutorial videos and also one documents. I just want to give you some very quick conceptual guidance quickly about why we're doing this. Okay. For lab number 5 and lab number 6, and also your programming test number 3, not the coming one, but the next one. Okay. Lab number 5, lab number 6, and also your programming test number 2. Oh, sorry. I don't want to scare you. Programming test number 3, right? Number 3, which is going to be sometime in March, maybe March. I forgot. Anyway, you can check your calendar. So these assessments are going to assume the following conceptual model. Okay, let me tell you what they are. We don't have console application anymore. Actually, we don't have console application either for your programming test 1 and 2. Okay, so what you will be given will be simply a test over here, like a tester. Pretty much like for your lab number 5, you were only given something called test, like a member tester or test member, either way. Okay, and then in the test, in the JUnit test class, you were given a list of individual JUnit tests, right? And initially, that's the only class you're given. And the model package, oh, I didn't say model here. So the model package initially is simply just empty, nothing you were given. All right. So the idea would be you are really required to train yourself to read the JUnit test classes and also the individual JUnit test methods. Read each one of them and see how they actually create and manipulate objects. And then you have to reverse engineering what should be the required classes over here in the model package. It might be just one class that's required, and inside that particular class, you might get constructor, attributes, accessor, mutators, and etc. And there might be multiple classes that will work with each other that you have to create, right? So that's why reading the JUnit test will be very crucial. Okay, that's the top level guidance I want to give to you. And then I'll point to you some references about where you should really complete before you attempt lab number 5. And Armin, I can answer your question first.
Oh, the hand was from before.
Oh, okay, sure, no problem. Okay, so guys, I think that's a conceptual guidance for you at the top level. You should really have this kind of mental model about separation of concern, right? Given the JUnit test, which does not compile as expected in the beginning. And then you got to work out exactly what classes and classes you should really create, and also individual attributes, methods, and etc. Okay. Let me just point to you where you should really go to. Okay, and then I can move on to do some practice problem with you, maybe 1 or 2. So if you go to your Moodle page, sorry, eClass, you know, the one for MNO over here. And then if you go to your lab 5 instructions, right? Hopefully most of you have already read it, but if you have not, let me point to you. And as Armin correctly pointed out, I'm going to make the lab 5 submissions open, simply just hidden from now. Okay, I'm gonna make it available today. Okay. All right, let me go to the instruction for your lab number 5, right? I'm not gonna read it. I just want to point to you the stuff you want to make sure you complete. If you go to task number 1 over here, right? Number 1, the weekly tutorial video, for sure, as usual. Please study that carefully. And then there will be one important note to read. Okay, so let me just open that quickly. That one there actually simply use another small example about counter, like a counter class. You want to read this document over here after you have gone through the tutorial videos. Okay, think about these two items do things in different direction. For your week 6 tutorial, we kind of say we build a class and then we write the test. However, the notes I just mentioned to you over here, the notes, I'm going to keep this notes here. The notes actually go the other way around. You will say, given the test, you want to work out what classes you should really build, right? We could try both directions, okay? And then let me go there. Let me say, you can read it through. If you got any trouble, I still got office hour tomorrow and Wednesday. Also the Q&A tomorrow morning, if you want to come. At the end of the document here, I actually gave you some example code over here for you to try. So you can download it, the starter file, and then you will see the JUnit test, it simply doesn't compile. And then you should really build a solution according to section 2, how section 2 guides you. So that's something you should really do before you try lab number 5. For lab number 5, you'll follow exactly the same procedure as outlined in this document over here. Right? It's really crucial for you to do that. All right. All right. So I think that's basically what I would like to talk about briefly about your lab number 5. Guys, do you have any high-level question about lab number 5 you want to ask me quickly before I move on to some practice questions for your practice test 2, programming test 2? Any question about lab number 5? Anybody? All right. No problem. You can also ask me by email or forum or any other means. That's fine. All right. So now I would like to talk about your programming test 2 a little bit. Okay. We got about maybe about 10 to 15 minutes left. I do want to do at least one problem together with you. Okay. So guys, I'll give you a choice. How about that? Okay. For those of you who are still here, I'll let you decide. I can either go over one problem that you were given for lab number 4. I can go over with you the solution, or I can go over one of the practice problems that you were given. Remember, I gave you practice test 2A, 2B, and 2C in the E class, right? I can also go over one of them if you wish. You got to tell me which one. Another way. So there is a website which I recommended to you guys in the syllabus in the very beginning of the semester. It's called CodingBat. Okay, the CodingBat website actually got many good example practices for you to practice your loops. And I chose 2 of them. I can also go over one of them together with you. I can leave another one, the other one as exercise for you to complete. I got all the questions, references here already. So do you guys have any preference about which one we should do together? You can put on the chat, tell me which one you might prefer. I'll see which one might got more people responding, and then I can do it. I think for the time that's left, we might just be able to do one. Okay, either one problem from lab 4, or one problem from practice test, or one problem from CodingBat. Okay, Michael suggested without 10. Okay, sure. Guys, if you have no opinion, we can follow just Michael suggested. It's a good problem anyway. Okay, so Perversia, so practice test problem. Okay. So Perversia, do you have any practice test question in mind that you want to do together?
I don't have anything specific in mind. I'm fine with anything.
Oh, okay, sure, no problem. Let's okay, how about we just follow Michael? I think other people are simply shy. Okay, sure. Let's now go with Michael's suggestion. Okay, but guys, before I do that, okay, I do want to point to you where you can find the CodingBat. Okay, you can simply just Google for CodingBat. Bat, the bat, as you do baseball, right? Bat. Go to the website there, and under Java, you will see array 1, array 2, and also array 3. And you can try maybe starting from array 1. I think array 1 is pretty easy. Yeah, but you can try a few just to get a feel. And also, you can also do array 2 as well. Array 3 are more challenging than others, but you can try array 2. Okay, let me now do the one that Michael preferred. Let's say without 10. Let's now go to without 10. You can go to the website and then without 10. Okay. Basically, they were pretty much like the format for your programming test 2, also like your test 1 as well. They will give you some problem description over here, and then they'll give you some example, and then you'll simply just code it up over here. Okay, I'll give you some initial draft of my solution. I hope that will be correct, or maybe very close to be correct. and then you just program something here. And then, for example, I can say, I just return null over here, just for the sake of illustration. And then once you're confident with your solution, you can say go. And then what that will show is it's going to show you a list of test values that will actually run on your submission. Apparently, I gave a very terrible solution. That's why none of them passed. But your goal should be with as few trials as possible. You want to get all green, pretty much like a JUnit test idea. Okay, so that's something you can also do after our session. Okay, before I code it up in Eclipse together with you, I can also use the opportunity to review some basics. And I would suggest you review, you look at the problem very quickly. I'll give you 1 minute. So guys, can you just please spend 1 minute over here and read the problem description on the screen quickly, and then I will conceptually sketch some solution, and then we'll code it out. All right. Let's wait for 1 minute just for you, and then hopefully we can finish by 4:15. All right. Okay, so hopefully everybody's reading it. Excuse me. All right, let's wait for another few seconds. All right. Okay. So guys, I think I have one particular way to solve it myself intuitively. That's my first reaction. So I would suggest you can sketch your idea quickly on the paper or think in your mind. But let me tell you how I would solve it. Right? Just let's say this, for example. Let's say if the input array looks like this, right? This one here. Let's say this is the input array nums. Okay. And then that one there is simply of size 4. 1, 2, and 3. And then we got 1, 10, 10, and also 2. And eventually, what we want to get is we want to get basically 1, 2, 0, 0. Eventually, right? The output. Notice that in this in the problem description, you may actually modify and return the given array, which means I simply modify nums, or I can simply return a new array. I would suggest I go for this one here. I think this one is more intuitive since the problem doesn't say you cannot create a new array. But for your test, you can create as many intermediate arrays as you like. We don't have that constraints on the space. Okay. Let's say the output is going to be something like this. Okay. So let me tell you how I would conceptualize the step, and then I'm going to try to code it up quickly. Okay, I would suggest I'm going to scan through the array from left to right. We know how to do that in the standard way. And then whenever I see any value, let me say I have some count over here. Okay, whenever I see any, if the current value is simply not equal to 10, so that means we want to keep it, right? So that means I'm going to, number one, I'm going to copy this value over here to here. And then the count should be initially 0, and now it should be incremented to 1. And then when I see this value over here, because it's equal to 10, so which means eventually it's going to correspond to some 0, which I don't have to worry about for now. All right. And then when I go to the next one here, that's also 10, I can also ignore that. And then if I go to the next one here, 2, is actually not equal to 10, right? So that means I can copy this value. I can copy this value over 2 over here, and then I can increment this count by 2, by 1. Sorry. So it'll be from 1 to 2. So and then I'm done scanning through the array. So what I would do is I will just need to see the count value here is basically tells me this will be whatever position that's before this is really storing all the non-10 values. And then everything after that should just be 0. Okay, so that will be exactly 1, 2, 0, 0. You can see over here, right? So guys, everybody follows? Okay, I hope. All right. You know what? I think there are two things. There are two possible ways I can do this program here. Either I can do on Eclipse or I can do it on the coding bat. I would say, what about I do it in the coding bat just to show you how to use the website. But when you download the source code today, I'll copy and paste once I'm done. So you can see under utilities, I already declared the two methods I prepared for you. We're going to do the without 10. And then there's another called tenRun. So that's another interesting problem to solve. I'll leave that to you. All right. So why don't we try this on the coding bat over here? Okay. Let's try together. Okay, so that's the conceptual idea over here, right? So I'm going to use, I'm going to scan, let me just recap. I'm going to scan through the array from left to right, and then I'm going to maintain a counter for all the non-10 numbers. And then I'm going to also use the count as indices to really copy over to the output array. That's what I would do, okay? Let me call it output, okay? Let me be consistent. Let me just go here, and then I will declare the output array. Another advantage of using this website, which I'll recommend you do, you can see here, this website, this web page does not have a compiler like in Eclipse, which means when I program, I really need to make sure I know what I'm writing. Otherwise, when I say go, it's simply just going to give me some compilation error, right? So this might be another good training for you. You don't really rely too much on the compiler. You want to be almost like a compiler in your mind, okay? Let's try this. Integer and then output. And then I know that it's going to be of the same size as the numbers, right? So now how do I create a new array? New integer array, nonce.length. And then eventually I want to return output. And you can see initially all the elements in the this output array will just be 0 by default, right? All right, what I will do is I'm going to go over the nums array. Integer I will be 0, I less than nonce.length I plus plus, right? Very standard. And then I'm going to do some conditional, inside the loop. I would say if the current elements I'm looking at is not equal to 10, right? That's the one I would like to keep. And then let me also declare some counter over here. Initially it's 0. So that means I need to do two things if that's not equal to 10, right? For example, you can see when count is actually initially 0, and then I'm seeing this 1 over here. I need to do two things. Number one, I should really do output at position count, which is 0, is assigned to nonce at position I over here. That's what I should do, right? Agree? You can think about the manipulation, okay? So what I would do is I'll go back here, and then I would say it's not equal to 10. So number one, I should do output at position count is assigned to nonce at position I. So guys, I think when you review this solution here, you want to convince yourself why in this particular line is really the key. Why here to index into the output, I need to use count. On the other hand, when I'm indexing into nonce, I need to use I. So that'll be some important insight for you to consider. All right. After this, I should also say count plus plus. Okay, sorry, I shouldn't say Control S. Okay, count plus plus simply means, so once I actually store, for example, 1 over here into index 0, I should immediately increment count to be 1. That means the next element that's not equal to 10 should be stored in index 1, right? Let me go back here, and then I think that's good. All right. So after this, once we exit from the loop, we will know that, again, once we exit from the loop, in this particular example, count is simply equal to 2. So that means it's conceptually it's pointing to over here. That means starting from here until the end of the array, I'm going to fill in zeros. All right. All right. So what I will do is I'm going to say for integer j is assigned to I, right? I'm just reusing the last updated value for I. It's really important for you to see that. And then j less than, let's say here I can say maybe output dot length. They're the same length anyway. Sorry. And then I'm going to say I plus plus. Oh, j plus plus. All right. And then I'm going to say output at position j is simply assigned to 0, right? I'm basically trying to say starting from the count, every element until the end should be 0. All right. All right. So hopefully you haven't really been lost yet. And then eventually it just return output. Okay. Let's see how suitable my solution might be. It could be very bad. It could be fine. Cannot find symbol. Okay, so that means over here, let's see over here, line number 11, right? You know, I can make some errors over here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Oh, I see. It's a very good review, actually. Remember, guys, I said if you declare the loop counter over here, so that means the scope for the loop counter is only within the loop over here. If I really want to use the integer, the loop counter here, what I should do is I should put it over here, right? All right. Okay, and then I'm just going to say go. Aha, guys, there we go, right? But I'm sure you can do it as well. I chose an easy one. Actually, that one's not that hard. All right, but guys, hopefully you can see the process over here. You can try it, and what I will do before I lose it, I'm just going to copy that, and then I'll make this solution available to you, so you can also try it out. Okay, so exercise for you. So this one's working already. I already proved it, right? You can see it's all green bar, right? It's working. And then exercise for you. So exercise for you, write some JUnit test. Okay, that's for you. All right, guys, I think, yeah, we still got maybe a few minutes, but there's another problem over here called tenRun. We'll see how it goes for tomorrow morning, but we can do it again, maybe tomorrow morning to solve more problems, but we'll see. Otherwise, you can simply try to solve it yourself as well. Try to practice as many as you can before the programming test too, okay? Okay, any questions for me before I call it a day? Anybody? You know, I can just I can pause maybe a little bit longer just in case you still want to ask me a question. Maybe you're still thinking. Okay. Everybody is okay? All right. So as I said, a final reminders about this week. So please make sure you actually start with your lab number 5. Before you start it, if you start with that, make sure you actually go over the tutorial video for week number 6, go over the written notes I spoke about, and then when you do lab number 5, hopefully that'll be more straightforward. But if you got any struggle, either attend the Q&A tomorrow morning, or you can actually send me an email or just drop by my office hour so I can clarify with you. All right. All right, guys, if you have no more questions here, thank you for coming and staying. It's been a little bit long session today, but if you got any more questions, get in touch, and then I'll be happy to answer. All right, have a good day. I'll talk to you later.